Welcome to Feel Us Do More. In this episode, Gill sits down with musician and keynote speaker Mark Deeks.
And I'd started to notice that when you ask people who have a musical hobby why they do it, often the first answer is nothing to do with music. It's things like, it gets me out of the house. I've got a small circle of friends. I'm depressed. Someone told me that when I was at school I would never be musical. I've got no confidence. And when you unpick what they're talking about, they're talking the language of well-being. It's just they've just chosen music to help them in that way, to provide comfort. Whilst I talk about my love of heavy metal music, I don't really care what music people like. I just want them to engage with it a bit more actively, because I think music is the most underutilized well-being tool we've got. I think we've forgotten how powerful music can be. I often say that I will create a book one day called Gigs We Have Known and Loved. Because the daft things that happen to you as a working musician are great. And the best one ever was the cat in the pram who was the ring bearer at the wedding.
Hi Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you here today. I first came across you, sound like I discovered something, at the Entrepreneurs Forum conference, and you were there talking about music, and I'm not going to spoil it by saying any more than that, but that's really sort of the end of the story as it is at the moment. That's the sort of current day, but the music bit has been the theme right the way through your life, I think, right from the age of five.
Yeah.
So tell us how you got into music in the first place.
I mean, there was a piano in the house. My mum and dad had both attempted to play it, both attempted piano lessons, both were frustrated, both weren't doing very well at it, and sort of had thrown their hands up in the air a bit and given up, and we'll have a few more lessons, and then given up. And like a lot of kids, kind of reaching up to the keys, seemingly fascinated by the noise it was making. And then when I was 5, there was sort of the shall we get him some piano lessons kind of discussion. And they didn't want to force me to do it, but it was just to see how he gets on. And it turned out I got on all right. So my mum has always said that I was better than her when I was 6, and that stopped her. And so I've carried that guilt forever.
Well, I feel her pain, because I did attempt to learn the piano when I was younger, and I did all right, but I had to learn. Mm-hmm. But obviously what you had was that true musical talent that just comes naturally to you, that I'm massively in awe of with everybody who just has that innate ability to be able to make music out of an object.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I always sort of talk about it is that, so I play guitar and I played viola a lot when I was a kid as well. Right. And when I play guitar now or played viola, I describe it as I'm having to think about it. Like I can do it, but I'm thinking about it. But when I play piano, for reasons unbeknownst to me, I can just do it. I mean, yes, I'm putting some thought into it, but it's so much more automatic, like breathing, way more than when I'm playing guitar. Because I play live in 2 bands, and one I'm playing keys and one I'm playing guitar. And when I'm with the band where I'm playing guitar, I am, oh yeah, it's there. I'm trying to remember lyrics at the same time.
Yeah.
But when I'm playing keys, it's just, pointing at random people in the crowd, trying to look slightly less uncool than I do on a daily basis.
At what point did you think, actually, this is something I want to do as a career? This isn't just a hobby.
I mean, I can honestly say I don't know how to do anything else. I mean, like a lot of musicians, I got into teaching pretty early. That tends to be a sort of a backup career for most musicians, be it instrumental one-to-one teaching or be it classroom teaching. So I've done a lot of that in my life. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how to do anything else. I was talking to someone earlier about, what C-suite experience do you have? Like, I barely know what a C-suite is. I've never had a corporate job or any kind of business job other than employing myself. Mm-hmm. So my experience of being a business is me, and creating enough income for me. So my knowledge of my only job I've ever had is as a music lecturer. So I know education, but apart from that, what else would I do? And even that, you sometimes when the economy's doing its thing or times are harder, and you have that conversation with your partner and like, maybe I need to get a job.
A proper job.
Well, yeah. and then the question is, well, what is it? What would I do? I don't know. I don't know how to do anything. I mean, I'm sure I could probably learn because I'm not daft, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was just automatic when I was at school and college and university. yeah, my parents, I know, had the conversation with friends of, should you not make him do a subject that will lead to a job kind of thing? Like, you know, you couldn't possibly make a living out of music in the Northeast, which I've proven to be, it was fine. But yeah, it was never a conscious decision. It's just, this is who I am. This is what I know how to do. I'm pretty good at it. Off we go.
And, you know, people outside, you know, there's so many young people clamouring to get into the music industry because they think it's glamorous and it's, you know, it's high stakes, all of that sort of stuff. But actually, we were talking earlier, you know, the reality of a lot of people, when you're in bands and you're in two, when you're touring, when you're travelling, it's not all a bed of roses, as you say.
No,
what's the reality of being a musician? What is life like on a day-to-day basis?
I mean, you know, on a day-to-day basis during the week, I'm not with the bands. It's not like we make a full-time living from it.
Yeah.
It's, you know, my work as a speaker, as a teacher, performer, and musical director. That's my day-to-day existence. But then on a weekend, it can be, right, we're going to Belgium this weekend to do a concert or two. And the reality of that is long days, not a lot of sleep, cheap hostels that you get to at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're leaving at 6. It's just somewhere to put your head down for 4 hours. That's the reality. And, you know, that's not to moan about it, but for context, whilst we're not famous, we'll sell 10 or 20,000 copies of a record when we bring one out. So we have a following. And even at that level where we can rock up in France and play to a few hundred people or whatever, there's no money being generated by that. It's a glorified hobby. And it's great. I mean, someone else is paying for me to go to a different country, play music to a few hundred of our fans and come home. So they're paying for it to happen. But we're not coming home with loads of money in our pocket. I mean, this just never happens. So the reality is you still got to love it. And, you know, when I was 15, 16, getting into rock music, the notion that I'd be sat here as a 47-year-old talking about going to a different country to play to a few hundred fans would have been unbelievable. Wow, the dream, to use the cliche. But the reality is a cheap hostel at 2 o'clock in the morning.
So tell us about your two bands you just mentioned there, because they're quite different.
Yeah, I mean, the two metal bands, but two very different styles of metal. So Winterfilleth is a black metal band. We've released 8 albums. We're just next year will be our 20th anniversary. We're signed to Candlelight Records, which is a quite well-known metal label. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't in the band at first. I joined for album 4. So I've been in the band for over 10 years now. And yeah, I mean, I love it. It's the dream in some ways. But like I say, it's not a career. We sort of call ourselves, well, there's an Iron Maiden song called Weekend Warrior, which is actually about football hooligans. But the principle is the same. The idea of just being able to do it on a weekend and then come back home to reality is very true. So I play keyboards and backing vocals in that. And then my solo project is called Arth, which is an old Northumbrian word, which means my native land. And all the lyrics are about Northumbrian history. So I play guitar and write all the music for that. It's very much my baby. It's a one-man thing, and I have other musicians help me out when we play live. And that's melodic doom metal, so that's a very different style of metal. But the record label call it monastic doom because all the vocals sound like monks chanting because there's loads of harmony vocals now.
But it's quite a contrast from your sort of your beginnings, you know, viola, piano. Yeah. Those things you don't necessarily think, oh yeah, he'll end up doing it in a metal band.
No, not at all.
So how did that work?
I mean, it's just a very compartmentalized existence, which it was for most of my adult life. In that, you know, most people who get into piano or some form of musical lessons when they're kids, like I say, will become teachers, instrumental or in classrooms. I lived, I guess, the very standard existence in one side of my life in that I got into running choirs and worked as a musical director and doing piano teaching and so on. And that side fits together. But like a lot of teenagers, I got into rock music and just dreamt of being a rock star. So I kind of lived the traditional musician's career in reverse, in that I became a music lecturer and a music teacher and did a sort of the proper job side of it in the first part of my career when I was in my 20s and 30s. And normally people will try and become famous at that point and then fall back into teaching, whereas I did it the other way around. So I you know, have been in the band for the last 10 years, but I'm 47 now. So if you do the maths, you can see where I did the proper job first. So they were two very separate parts of life for a long time, in that it was forever sort of taking one hat off and putting the other hat on. When I'm on tour with the band, they don't understand why I have choirs full of old ladies. When I'm with the choirs, they don't understand why I make this noisy music, and everyone just sort of laughs at me wherever I am. And that was how it has always been thus. But in more recent years, it's become, what is the thread through all of this? And the thread through all of it is how music makes us feel and what it does for us from a well-being perspective, from a mental health perspective. And, by sort of bringing them all together under that umbrella, that's kind of really what's, I think, has led to the point of where I am now in life. And that my message now is helping people to connect with the music that they love, whatever that music is, and remind them of the good that it can do people when you take the time to sort of more intentionally interact with music.
And was that an intentional thing when you left academia? Did you think this is where I'm going to take this?
No, not at all. I mean, I walked away from my lecturing job nearly 13 years ago. I felt disgruntled a bit and annoyed that I felt like I'd been forced out of education. It was entirely my choice to walk, but the environment that you work in education is often extremely pressured, very stressful. But I'd basically decided that, if I could make within shouting distance of the same salary on my own as a working musician, it would be a price worth paying to make a few quid less, but not have the stress of that environment. So I just became, to all intents and purposes, what was referred to as a working musician. I gigged and played weddings and taught and did whatever I could find to, running choirs and so on to pay the bills. And it wasn't until in the last few years where I've started to sort of really sort of, I'm sure we'll talk about, some more difficult parts of life started to happen that and sort of really analyze my relationship with music more deeply, and started to really reflect on what it brings us and how it's led to this point. Is this thread of music is way more than just noise. It's way more than just entertainment, but we treat it as a background to our lives too much.
So you've alluded there to, there was a sort of a watershed moment in a way in your life where you reevaluated what you wanted to do. Are you okay to tell us about that?
Yeah, so I mean, March 2020, so just over 5 years ago, we went for the 20-week scan of our first child and got the news that every new parent dreads. We chose not to know the gender, but we found out at that moment it was our daughter. And we were told that she had 2 terminal conditions, or 2 very severe medical conditions. Essentially, that would both mean it was extremely unlikely she would survive to birth. If she did, she would be in an extremely bad way. And one of the conditions was also dangerous to my wife, Angela, as well, for the remainder of her pregnancy. So it was recommended that we have what's called a termination for medical reasons, which is a TFMR. And that's a really, obviously, if you've never heard of it, until you're in the moment kind of thing, you suddenly face with the reality of the situation. It's a very difficult, peculiar sort of area of the baby loss world, as it's known, that you're legally, it's your call what to do. And of course, the perception, I guess, and this is absolutely not grief top trumps in the slightest, when people talk about stillbirths and miscarriages and all those kinds of awful things, there is a sort of unsaid understanding that that's something that's happened to the woman and there's no choice to be made. But when it comes to TFMR, you are given this diagnosis, but you are there being asked to sign the piece of paper. Do you want to end this pregnancy? Which of course you don't want to do. And so that comes with a very peculiar form of guilt, and a very particular form of guilt, because my wife had to have surgery, and on the way to surgery she could still feel her daughter kicking. And that is brutal to watch happen, and I'm sure for my wife even worse. And so 10 days later the UK is in lockdown, and now we're dealing with that. And so a lot of the support that you might have expected, which is limited at the best of times, wasn't there, or on the end of a phone rather than in person. We weren't allowed to go to the funeral, etc. And so you're now in a position where you are trying to make sense of this horrific thing that's going on, not even allowed to sort of hug your parents, which obviously was particularly awful for my wife. My in-laws live at the other end of the housing estate, so we could see them in the distance but couldn't hug them. And it was a case of, from my point of view, I guess, like, I went into practical mode. I'd lost thousands of pounds of work in 24 hours because of the lockdown. And now I was trying to work out how to make a living from the situation we were all in. At the same, my wife couldn't work, partly because of what she was going through, but also partly because of the industry that she worked in was just shut down overnight. So then we were in a situation where, I guess for the first 5 or 6 months, I mean, I thought I'd grieved, but perhaps I hadn't subconsciously. And it was only a few months later that I really started to unravel and was having panic attacks, and the anxiety was off the chart, and just I'd be out walking the dog in the sunshine and need to get home immediately for reasons unknown. So that really started to unravel quite quickly. And at the time, there was an audio-only social app called Clubhouse, which on the surface was everything I hate about social media. But for reasons I don't really know, I kind of was curious about, everyone was talking about this big explosion of Clubhouse. And for those who don't know, it's essentially audio only, no posts, no pictures, no comments, no likes, just speaking. So you would go into what was called a room, and it was effectively like a podcast / radio station where anybody, and there were millions of users on it, anybody could set up a room, and people could come in, and it was like a stage and an audience, and you could move people up from the audience to the stage, and they would be able to unmute their microphone and speak on anything. I mean, there was business stuff going on, mental health stuff going on, any subject you could possibly imagine. And so there was a lot of mental health rooms on there, and people were just, I guess, at a part of humanity where everyone was sat at home feeling like they needed to get something off their chest and connect, because a lot of the human connection had gone away. So I found myself talking about my passion for music, but also connecting it to mental health, what we were talking about, what was going on in our lives. And it was almost like my therapy, I guess, in some ways. But the response from others was, it's unusual to hear a man talking so openly on a mental health subject in general, but certainly not, men don't talk about baby loss. And so it seemed to be getting a response, but it was doing me good at the same time. And so that's kind of what began the journey towards speaking openly about the connection between music and mental health and what I'd gone through.
So during that time, obviously you'd found that outlet for your emotion, but what role did music play in helping you through that time, and your wife as well? Yeah,
I mean, we're both huge music fans, so music's a pretty constant in the house. She's very keen ever since she was a child in sort of amateur music theatre, so she's forever singing and that kind of thing. So there were several sort of instances. So the first instance was that when we found out the news that we were losing Laurie, as we'd named her, the song that was playing in the hospital reception at the time was our first dance from our wedding. Oh, wow. And so we now had the song that was our happiest song, was now intrinsically linked to the worst moment of our lives. So that was weird. So that took some processing. So we kind of couldn't listen to it at first again, and then sort of had to, I describe it as having to fight to reclaim it somehow. So gradually allow ourselves to listen to it again. Yeah. And then the other instance was I was writing the first Arth album at the time, and my brother-in-law and sister-in-law had a star named after Laurie, and we did it as a surprise. So this beautifully ornate star chart arrives in the post, to put on the wall, showing us where the Laurie Deeks star is in the Andromeda system, and the coordinates of the star are the numbers on my tattoo. And when I was writing this Arth album, going through this really difficult mental time, one night I'm in bed, I'm sound asleep, I jump up in bed at 3:00 in the morning and go, what if they're not star coordinates? What if those numbers are the notes of a musical scale? What does it sound like if you play it as a melody? And so I always say, for any music theory people I know, there are no zeros in a musical scale. So I had to make them a 1 for creative license. So I worked out what the melody sounded like in my head, and I went for a run that morning, and I was working out what chords could fit underneath it if that was a melody. And so that became the melody at the end of the Arth album. I knew I didn't want to write a song about losing a child. No. I didn't want to write words about it, and all of Arth is about Northumbrian history anyway, so that would have been strange. But I felt like I needed to use music to process what I was going through somehow. I needed to almost legitimize her existence, because it's a child you've never met. It's like they were never real because you never met them. And so by writing that melody, I could prove she has existed, because if she'd never existed, this star would never have existed, and now this melody would never have existed. Now there was something positive that I could tangibly say, this has happened as a result of this that we're going through. And so most people who bought that record have no idea that that melody is what it is. In the liner notes on the artwork, it just says in memory of Laurie Deeks and those numbers. And so most people will have no idea why that is.
Yeah.
But the melody at the end of the album is that. And so when we play that song live, it's, you know, very emotional, and I sort of have to try not to cry in front of metal fans. Which is, but so that was a huge part in me sort of processing what we were going through.
Yeah.
And then the last one, which I don't always talk about, but why not? Let's throw it in. So I ran the Great North Run in memory of Laurie and for a baby loss group that had supported us. And I'm no athlete, as you can see. And so running a half marathon is like the absolute limit of my physical capabilities. And one of the ways that I have to run to music, because if I'm just aware of the suffering, then it's too much. So I have to try and distract myself with music. But I detest the concept of shuffle playlists. I cannot deal with it. I'm too much of a control freak. I need to be in charge of what song's coming on next. But in an attempt to distract myself from the suffering of the half marathon, I put together this 6-hour playlist called Running and hit shuffle on the start line and included the Arth song with that melody in, and just thought at some point I might need that, you know, and forgot about it kind of thing. And because here are all these other songs that I really like, and just randomly throwing at me for the next 2 hours. And of course, 6 hours of music and 2 hours playlist. Last 100 yards, as I was really struggling to get to the finish line, on comes Laurie's melody. And it just could have knocked me over with a feather. Yeah. And my wife hadn't been able to run the Great North Run because we now have a daughter, Nola, and she'd been really injured in birth. So she had a really difficult birth, Angela, bless her. So she couldn't run it. So I was on my own at the finish line, just bawling my eyes out with this melody going. I mean, I was knackered as well, which didn't help. But yeah, so music strangely just keeps playing a little role in navigating me through this.
Fear Less, Do More is brought to you by the team at Square One Law. If you're enjoying this episode, hit follow or subscribe. It really helps us out, and it means that you won't miss out on any future episodes. We have some great fearless guests that leave you feeling really inspired. And if you think someone else would enjoy it too, feel free to pass it on, whether that's a mate, a colleague, or someone in your network. Thanks for listening. Now back to the conversation.
And from that, you have a business. Mm-hmm. So tell me about the business and how that works, what you do.
Well, I go into businesses or conferences and speak about and just tell my story. But it's not just a case of I just want to share my story for the crack of it. I think it works on a number of different levels. So firstly, like I said, men don't tend to talk about this stuff very openly. So I think that's important, because if I don't speak about it, I'll go stir crazy. So I think that baby loss, as a general whole, is one of the great unspoken about subjects. We will all know someone who's been affected by it multiple times, and no one speaks about it. So in a work environment, in an HR environment, from a business workspace environment, I think it's important that we try and make that conversation happen somehow. And if me talking about music and how it's got me through it helps that, then I think that's important. Obviously, men's mental health is something that I feel passionate about, but also the wider subject of, whilst I talk about my love of heavy metal music, I don't really care what music people like. I just want them to engage with it a bit more actively, because I think music is the most underutilized well-being tool we've got. I think we've forgotten how powerful music can be. And I think most people have music on in the background and live life on top of it. And if they could just take 5-10 minutes each day to frame it as a well-being tool rather than, just the background noise while I'm driving to work, I think it would do a lot of people good. And I think it would unwind a lot of people, just take the edge off. I have no mental health training, I have no scientific training whatsoever, but I've spent a lifetime as a working musician around people who are engaging with music just because it's a hobby. They have no intentions of making a profession out of it. So my choirs with hundreds of singers in, or the thousands of people I've taught to play the piano over the years, they're coming to this purely from a starting point of they just want a musical hobby. And I'd started to notice that when you ask people who have a musical hobby why they do it, often the first answer is nothing to do with music. It's things like, it gets me out of the house. I've got a small circle of friends. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I suffer from whatever. I've got a fractious home life. I've got a stressful job. I need a new circle of friends. I need some time just for me. Someone told me that when I was at school, I would never be musical. I've got no confidence. I never thought I'd stand on the stage. I can't imagine doing that. And it would do a lot for me. And when you unpick what they're talking about, they're talking the language of well-being. It's just they've just chosen music to help them in that way, to provide comfort, to give confidence, to reduce stress, whatever it is. And some people go for running and join the gym, and some people join a choir. And whatever it is, I think that if people can just proactively engage with music a little more than most people do, I think we'd not solve a lot of the world's problems, but do you know what I mean? It's a well-being tool that is literally in our pocket. We've all got it on our phones. We can all put Spotify or Apple Music or whatever it is, but we label our playlists all too often as in the name of the activity you're going to do at the same time, running. I mean, there's a classic example when he says the hypocrite. But I'm not saying we can't do that, but why don't we have playlists that say songs that make me smile, songs that remind me of someone I love, songs that calm me down when I'm stressed. When I feel mood X and want to feel mood Y, here are the songs I know that do that. And what's on that playlist is between you and the skies. Like, it doesn't matter. Yeah. But remind us, take the time to connect with the music that is part of who we are. We all have happy, sad, personal memories when songs are part of that memory. And I think if people ask themselves, what songs remind me of someone I love? They do that. They smile. Because it's instant. And one of the things I've noticed with a lot of well-being initiatives, all well-meaning and powerful and effective, you quite often have to explain to someone what the well-being initiative is before they can do anything about it. You don't need to do it with music. I just say, what songs remind you of someone you love? And it's done. Your brain has immediately gone there because it's already part of who you are. And when we're kids, music is part of the fabric of who we are, much more than when we're adults. Most people will dance around their room and make up dance routines when they're kids, and write out lyrics to their favorite songs and think of the first records they bought and the first gigs they've been to. And when they're adults, they're just too busy dealing with life, because we all are, adulting, as we call it in our house. But music then becomes just this thing that's on in the background. Or I haven't listened to music radio in 30 years. I don't want someone else to decide what music I'm listening to. That's my control freakness coming out again. But the notion that I would just leave to chance what music was on as I'm in a car driving to a meeting is mind-melting to me. Put the music on that you know has a positive effect on you.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm a huge music fan, and I think some of my music choices, people would be questioning why that made me feel happy or whatever. But music's always had a real
It's individual.
Power for me. It's individual, and it can take you back to a precise moment in time instantly. So that power, like you say, I'm just sort of connecting those dots in my own head. I think for me, that's what it does. If I want to recreate the feeling that I had at a particular point in time, the way that I would do that is through music.
Exactly.
So you mentioned there around, talking about mental health, talking about baby loss as a man, and this podcast is about fear. Why do you think there is so much fear around talking about baby loss?
I don't know. I think a lot of it's to do with the language around it. Nobody knows what to say. The people going through it don't know what to say. The people watching you go through it don't know what to say because there are no words that you can surmise what's going on in. Yeah. And it's that awkwardness. And I think some of the sort of more awkward discussions that rewind 20 years ago we'd not have heard in the workplace, maybe. Things like menopause or suicide and some of the great challenging topics of life that once upon a time would never have been spoken about as openly as they are. I think baby loss should be like the next cab off the rank kind of thing, because we all know somebody. And we go to a teardrop event. So Teardrop's a local organisation, again, that supports local people going through baby loss. And
you can put the details in the show notes for people who may be affected.
They're part of an international wave of light, which happens every October. There's a baby loss awareness day. And it's 7 p.m. in every time zone across the world. There's a simple candlelit vigil. And the local one in Newcastle is at Northumberlandia, near Cramlington. Okay. And at that, super simple, tea lights out in the shape of a heart, read the names of the kids that have been lost. Some families are reading out 5 names. Now, having gone through it once, I cannot begin to fathom what it's like to go through that on a repeated basis. But there are so many people who are, and they're not talking about it, and that can't do them any good. That's something that I feel is really important. I just think that I knew that if I didn't speak about it, I was going to go under, kind of thing. And I felt that maybe it's just being super protective over my wife as well, that I just felt I could see what it was doing to her and encouraging her to speak about it as well. We went on a podcast together, which was a specific TFMR podcast. Right. And I think that there is, like I said earlier, there are so many forms of baby loss. It's the kind of thing that when you're around and you go through, you can't believe just how many variations of baby loss there are. And when you're around that environment, it's almost incredible that anyone's successfully born. When you hear of all of the things that can go wrong. And so it's a challenge that I think that on a personal level, if I didn't speak about it, it was going to be too much. But when you're around some of these events where you sort of see people awkwardly shuffling, like even in those environments, people still feel awkward about speaking about it. And it's just so deeply personal that people carry it around. Like my mum openly speaks about, she had 3 miscarriages and 2 before me and 1 after. And she wanted a large family. And I know that that's really affected her life. Like she still speaks about it. And I didn't want that for us. I didn't want it to define us in a negative way. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's why it's become so important to speak about.
So what would your advice be to somebody who is perhaps has a family member or a friend who is going through baby loss? What should they say? Because that's always the thing. People, if you're outside of that, you think, well, nothing I say is going to make this any better. So what on earth do I say? What should people do or say in those circumstances?
The language and the terminology is some of the most awkward stuff. It's really clunky, a lot of it. So we've even had a problem with like termination for medical reasons because there's so much negative connotation around the word termination. Yeah. You're not choosing to do it, even though legally you're choosing to do it. So that's strange. Some of the most throwaway everyday questions are the most challenging for people in those situations to hear. So how many times can the people listening think about, you've walked up to someone and said, you got any kids? How many kids have you got? Because you don't know how to answer that. Someone said it to me this morning. Is that how many kids you got? 1 that's with us. That's really difficult to answer because you feel like you're doing them a disservice if you don't include them. Yeah. We've really struggled with it. Is it birthday or is it an anniversary? The day that we lost her. I don't know. Is it either? Is it both? So that's a strange one. We've struggled with things like when we go to some of the events, on their roller banners, and this is the baby loss charities. So they, of all people, should get this right. But they will have listed on their roller banners all of the kinds of situations that they're there to support. Stillbirth, miscarriage. And ours is called fetal abnormality. Brutal, isn't it?
Yeah.
I make no apology for repeating that to what's on their promotional banners. That's what ours is classified as. No one wants to hear that about their child. It goes right through you, right? Yeah. So the terminology, I think, and being aware of these just throwaway questions is really difficult. And I'm not necessarily here with a solution, but sometimes I would, if you know that somebody's going through this, and of course that's the first problem. Some people don't even tell anyone they've gone through it. But just being aware of how someone might feel about answering how many kids they've got. Do you have kids is a really difficult question to answer. We can say that we've got the happy ending, that we've now got Nola, and she's safely with us and 3 and an absolute tearaway and keeps us on our toes, but is the stereotypical 3-year-old. But we're very, very aware of how to answer that question and haven't yet found a solution. Yeah. And also we had a terrible experience with a production company who were making a documentary for Channel 4 on the subject of abortion, who wanted to interview us for it, but didn't say what it was going to be called. And they presented it as an opportunity for parents who had gone through TFMR to try and destigmatize this conversation. But in fact, what it was a documentary that was going to be made about a court case that was going on where a lady who had been born disabled was suing her parents for allowing her to be born and having now this life of difficulty and challenge and suffering. And the name of it was just going to be abortion. I can't even remember what it is. I blanked it from my mind, but like, is it right? Kind of thing. But it was just such a tabloid-esque headline.
Yeah. And
they were, without telling anyone, interviewing parents who'd gone through these situations. And when we found out, I was furious. So it's the language and the terminology and the sensationalism and the awkwardness and the clunkiness of the language that I think most people, certainly we, have found difficult with. So just being sensitive around that, because the most throwaway everyday conversation is a challenge.
Yeah, and I think you as you said there, the sensationalization. I think I've certainly observed that in a lot of. We have a thirst. We seem to have a thirst as society now for trauma.
Yeah.
And for bad news stories. And
exactly.
The wickedest of people. You know, everything's about serial killer stories, but really awful abuse stories and things like that. What's the way out of that? How can we change that so that it becomes more empathetic, more supportive? I know that you do not have all the solutions.
No, I absolutely don't.
Talking to somebody who's in the sort of the thick of that, there must be a way through this.
I think we have to, without wanting to get political or religious about it, but sadly those two big things are connected to this. That everyone has a viewpoint already on the subject of termination, etc., that is often related to religion and politics. And neither of those things are helpful to the people on the ground. Like, I couldn't give two hoots what your religion or political or spiritual allegiance is. But on a practical level, going through that is nothing to do with religion or politics. And so I think you need anyone who is ready to cast aspersions in that. And I know that there are people of our friends and family, who don't like how open we are about talking about it. I know that there are people who think somehow I've made a business out of it. I mean, yeah, I get paid as a speaker, but I think the impact that I can potentially have as a result of that is far greater than that. Mm. This is a personal passion as well as a business. And so, to refer to fear less, I couldn't fear less. I think that you are absolutely right. There is a thirst, is a good word, a good way of putting it, for sensationalizing all kinds of awful situations that humans go through, by nature or otherwise. But keeping religion, politics out of it would be a great place to start.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about some more lighter things.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your daughter there, and is she likely to be a musician?
I think it would be surprising if she didn't. but I mean, yeah, she sings constantly. So her mum is constantly singing around the house, and I obviously have made a life out of music. So she will certainly love it as a pastime if it's not her profession.
And the other thing is it true that you taught Lenny Henry how to play piano?
Yeah. Once.
Once.
It's a great story.
Okay. How did that come about?
Random, completely random. So it turns out that when he's on tour, so he decided that he wanted to become more of a kind of a rounded performer, and he wanted to be able to sort of play daft songs as part of his comedy routine. So he, as a result of that, had started piano lessons. Where he lives, he was doing okay. He'd taken a few grades. He sort of set himself the challenge of taking the exams and stuff. But when he's on tour, that's quite difficult to maintain. So he gets his management to phone a random piano teacher in every city that he is on tour and say, "Can I have a piano lesson, please, to keep his hand in?" And that's what happened. So I got a random phone call from someone who didn't want to reveal who their client was. Can you come to this hotel and teach them piano? And eventually, when I said yes, they told me who it was. I was like, well, yeah, great, it sounds fun. So I rocked up at his hotel with my keyboard underarm, literally knocked on his bedroom door and sat in his bedroom and gave him a piano lesson.
Was he any good?
Oh, it was all right, yeah. Keep at it. So, but I always joke that it wasn't a Premier Inn. Because it wasn't. It was a bit posher.
I can imagine. And that's a sort of something that you'll always remember from your career. What's the other sort of standout moments from all the things that you've done in music?
I mean, the daft things, I often say that I will create a book one day called Gigs We Have Known and Loved. Because the daft things that happen to you as a working musician are great. I mean, I don't know how long your podcast is going to be, but the best one ever was the cat in the pram who was the ring bearer at a wedding. That was a belter. Oh, right. Yeah, true story. Yeah, so the short version of the story is I'd been asked if I could play organ at a church wedding, and I can't play pipe organ. I mean, my hands would know what I was doing, but my feet is a very different beast. And I said that to the couple, and they're like, "Oh, we really like your style. Do you not want to try?" And I was a bit short of work at the time, so I said, "All right then." So they basically said, "We'll arrange it for you to come and practice in the church a few weeks before the wedding, and then you sort of get your eye in, kind of thing." So I said, "Okay." So they sent me all the hymns through for the service. I went, had a practice. Long story short, I thought it was going to be all right. So on the day I turned up early, asked the church warden, who was called Penelope, who was like an old hippie. She's quite a character. She brought me tea and biscuits when I went for the practice. And I said, before you let everyone in, because you can't practice pipe organ quietly, it's a loud beast. Can I just have 5 minutes? Yeah, fine. So I get myself sorted. Yeah, you can let everyone in. She lets the full congregation in and says, right, did they tell you about the cat? No, what cat? I was a little bit stressed. It was quite a hot day. I'm playing an instrument. I don't really know what I'm doing. She says, no, they said they would tell you about the cat. Again, they didn't tell me about the cat. What cat? She says, the cat's the ring bearer. I'm like, you and I both know that no cat is walking down an aisle with a ring. That's not happening. She says, right, look, they gave you a piece of music for the bridesmaids. Yes. They gave you a piece of music for the bride. Yes. She says, right, what's going to happen is I'm going to give you one signal. Play the piece of music for the bridesmaids. The bridesmaids will come in. Great. She says, I'm going to give you the second signal. You have to be silent. That's when the cat's going to come in. The cat can't get a fright from the noise of the pipe organ. Right. Third signal, bridal march. Great. Okay, let's just get this over with. 5 minutes to the start of this service, she says, would you like an order of service? So she gives me an order of service. They changed the hymns and not told me.
Oh, God.
So I was like, you just put me through weeks of preparation for this event. I've come to the church in advance. All of this is to waste because you've changed the hymns. She's like, well, I said, well, I swore. She's like, yes, I completely agree. There was some swearing. She says, what are you going to do? I said, well, under normal circumstances, knocking out Morning Is Broken is absolutely like I could do it blindfolded. She says, I'll get you the hymn book. I don't need the hymn book. It's bloody feet. My feet don't know what they're doing. So anyway, I said, right, let's just get this over with. So she gave me the first signal. I played the bridesmaid's entry, absolutely fine. She gave me the second signal. Turns out I was so stressed, I forgot about the cat. So I just played the bridal march. But because you're at the back of the church when you play pipe organ, you've got your back to everything that's going on because the pipe organ is often at the back and you literally got a wing mirror looking down the aisle. Right. I was too busy concentrating on what I was doing that I didn't look in the wing mirror. So I'd completely forgotten about the cat's existence. So I played the bridal march, service starts, I don't know anything's gone wrong. Then halfway through the service, the bride had written a poem for her new husband where she referenced their cat. And I felt the colour drain from my cheeks.
And you were like, oh.
I forgot the cat. So I said to her, I bluffed my way through the rest of it. I was stressed. I was like, get this over with. And I saw Penelope afterwards and she's like, I forgot the cat. And she's like, I know. I said, is the cat all right? You told me I had to be silent for the cat. And I've just blasted the bridal march at full tilt on this pipe organ. She said, the cat's fine. Yeah, it was in a pram. What? I said, are you telling me somewhere there is a video of somebody pushing a cat in a pram down an aisle with a ring attached to it whilst I, on a pipe organ, she's like, yes, there is a video of that. Well, and the bride hadn't even realised she'd changed the hymns. I said, do you know you changed the hymns? Did I? Oh, you were fine. I just walked off. So yeah, that one has always stuck with me. Somewhere I'd love to see that video. If there is a video somewhere of that cat in the pram to the bridal march, I want that on you being framed at 250 quid, please. Thanks very much.
I mean, but that's not the only time that you played at church organ. You played recently. You played for a private concert, didn't you? Which involved a church.
Yeah, I didn't play the organ though. Oh, I was playing guitar.
You were playing the guitar.
Yeah. No,
you should have been up there. You could have done a an Ivory duet.
No, absolutely not. So my art project, the one I referred to about being about Northumbrian history, we did a show called Organic Doom. Because it's doom metal. And the idea was that the pipe organ is a bit of a dying art. And so there was an initiative to try and get the pipe organ in front of a new audience, because of course it's usually very classical, quite an elderly audience, limited lunchtime concerts kind of thing. So we got asked to do a show where Arth would, because there's lots of pipe organ on the Arth album, not a real one. And they said, could you do a show at Huddersfield Town Hall, which the pipe organ is ginormous. It was like one of the biggest in Europe when it was built. And it's a huge hall. So we played the full album with the 6-piece metal band and this guy called David Pipe, which is his real name, which is fantastic. David Pipe playing organ. He's like the official church organist for the Diocese of Leeds or something. So he was full lit up pipe organ and we were, rocking out at the front. And that's the DVD in the new Arth album. The bonus DVD, so that was pretty cool because that was loud. Just bathing in the sound all the way around me.
And just to finish off, Mark, this is a question you may not. I wouldn't be able to answer this because I wouldn't be able to pick one. But what would you say if you look back over your life? What would be the soundtrack that would play for your life?
Get away.
Somebody asked this as an interview question.
I mean, what an awful question.
Hello.
I mean, I've said for many years that my favourite album of all time is Dirt by Alice in Chains. That was one of the first rock and metal albums I got into as a teenager, and I was obsessed by it. The harmonies are absolutely unique. I think Layne Staley was the most unique singer that's ever lived. I think it's an absolutely flawless record. But of course, there are, like you say, many, many others. I mean, I'm a huge Iron Maiden fan, so Seventh Son of a Seventh Son is another 10 out of 10 record, but I'm a huge Judas Priest fan. I mean, I could list you 100 without even breaking sweat.
Well, thank you very much. That's been really entertaining, but also really informative.
Thank
you. As I said, we'll put some details in the show notes for people who might need support from who may have never talked about the things that you've talked about today. But keep doing it because it's really, really important.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Fear Less, Do More, brought to you by Square One Law. If you found today's conversation inspiring or interesting, we've added a recommendation for what to listen to next. That's either on the screen now or in the show notes. Take care and we'll see you next time.